Who were the Anglo-Saxons? The Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes were three powerful Germanic tribes that first invaded and then settled in different parts of Britain. The term Anglo-Saxon is used for the language that was spoken and written by the Anglo-Saxons in England and southeastern Scotland from at least the mid-5th century until the mid-12th century. In schools, it's more commonly called Old English. Where were they? The Jutes settled in the south coast, mainly in Kent. The Angles settled in the east and also in the North Midlands, and the Saxons settled in the Thames estuary to the west, between the Jutes and the Angles. The Celts fought the invaders, but they were finally pushed away to the mountains in the far west, to what is now Wales. Wales means land of foreigners, a name the Saxons gave to the Celts. The settlement of the Anglo-Saxons was not pacific at all. There were many battles and war. By the year 650 AD, there were 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Number 1, Kent, the Jutes. 2, Mercia. 3, Northumbria. 4th, East Anglia. 5th, Essex, meaning East Saxons. 6th is Sussex, South Saxons. 7th is Wessex, meaning West Saxons. By the year 850 AD, these 7 kingdoms merged into 3 large Anglo-Saxon kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex. By this time, the Anglo-Saxons had become Christians.
Christianization of Anglo-Saxon England was a process spanning the 7th century. It was the result of the Gregorian mission in 587 AD. Ethelbert of Kent was the first king to accept baptism in the year 601. He was followed by Sabert of Essex and Redwall of East Anglia in 604.
When were they active? The Anglo-Saxon period in Britain spans approximately the 6 centuries from 410 to 1066 AD. This era is called the Early Middle Ages or Early Medieval period. Why they left their lands? Climate change had an influence on the movement of the Anglo-Saxon invaders to Britain. In the centuries after 400 AD, Europe's average temperature was 1 degree warmer than we have today, and that meant better crops and a rise in population in Northern Europe. At the same time, melting polar ice caused more flooding in low areas, such as in what is now Denmark, Holland and Belgium. So these people eventually began looking for new lands to settle in. How was their society? Life and society in Anglo-Saxon England. England was one of the wealthiest kingdoms in Europe. This was due to successful farming and trade in the towns and villages. The king, his earls, and the church all profited from this through taxes. The Anglo-Saxon community in England was basically a rural one. Most people depend on the land for survival. At the top of the social system was the royal house. This consisted of the king and edelings, who claimed a common ancestry with the king. The royal family. By the middle of the 9th century, the royal family of Wessex was universally recognized as the English royal family and held a hereditary right to rule. Succession to the throne was not guaranteed, as the Witan, or Council of Leaders, had the right to choose the best successor from the members of the royal house. Royal family. By the middle of the 9th century, the royal family of Wessex was universally recognized as the English royal family and held a hereditary right to rule. Succession to the throne was not guaranteed, as the Witan, or Council of Leaders, had the right to choose the best successor from the members of the royal house. Major nobility. Below the king were the earls, the ruling nobility. The earl was the king's right-hand man in a shire. The position was not hereditary, but it became usual in the 10th century to choose earls from a few outstanding families. Minor nobility. Below an earl was a thegn. They formed the backbone of the Anglo-Saxon army. With good service, they received lands from the king and could rise to become earls. Freemen. The upper group of commoners who held land freely and did not pay rent to a lord were known as freemen. Some freemen were expected to attend local courts to solve disputes. Serfs were the last social class. There were many people in England in the 10th century who held no land and worked for others in exchange for food and shelter. There were others who were legally recognized as enslaved and had no civil rights, although they could work on their own behalf and earn enough to buy their own freedom. Urban society. Towns were not structured in the same way as rural states were. The major towns such as London, York, Winchester and Oxford were fortified against enemy attack. Most commercial activity took place in the towns. Most people lived in what we would consider to be villages. London was the biggest town in England and yet only had 10,000 residents. Beowulf is an epic poem that it was written in Old English. The author and the exact date are unknown, but it is believed it was written between the 8th or 11th century. With this epic poem, we can see and understand how Anglo-Saxons used to live, act, feel and think. Don't you ever wonder how Old English sounds? Let's hear the first page of Beowulf.
Wat we gar dana in yar dagum feud kuninga thrim ye frunan hutha athalingus elim